So for those of you who were here last week, what we did was we looked at the story of Abraham and Sarah going into Egypt, and on one hand, but there was two stories where Abraham tells Sarah, his wife, that she should pretend to be his sister. And we looked at a story that was written by the author J, and a story that was written by the author E. And we looked at the comparisons between them. There's actually a third story that's also J. It has to do with Isaac and Rebekah. We're not going to look at it, and I'm not going to go back over it. It was just kind of an aside. What I want to do today is I want to go back to the Noah story and finish looking at the Noah story. And then I want to look at the binding of Isaac, if we have time. And what I would like to do today is, because I'm getting the feeling that perhaps some of you are understanding this concept, some of you may be getting it, but you're still confused, but maybe you're just playing like you like it anyway. And I imagine that there's some of you also who are still confused by what we're talking about and how it's actually playing out. So I want to do two exercises with you to try to illustrate what's happening and to help you start to prepare for how to read the text going forward. The book that I have that has in it the text that I was going to copy for you of the story of Marduk and Tiamat, which is a creation narrative from the ancient world, and the Epic of Gilgamesh, the excerpt one. I can't find the book. I'm sure it's here somewhere, so I didn't copy it for you yet. But we'll just keep going and get there. So what I thought we would do for the story of Noah today is, if you have your book, Who Wrote the Bible, or if you have your book, The Bible Sources Revealed, I want to do something where we're going to read the story in the authored tradition that it's written as a single unit. And then we're going to read the other part of it that has been interwoven into this text and read that as a unit, and we're going to compare them. Okay? So if you're in the Sources Revealed book, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 6, starting in verse 5. And if you're in the Who Wrote the Bible book, we're going to be on page 54. Page 54 or 42. Okay? Now, one of the things that we talked about with the flood narrative is that there are two primary authors of this story. One author is J, and one author is P. Who's P? Typically, when we think about the priest, what are the kinds of attributes or qualities or characteristics of the story that you might think would be in there or influenced in the text? Something having to do with sacrifices. Good.
Covenant.
Good. Covenant. Anything else?
Jerusalem.
Yeah, you might have something connected to Jerusalem. Or Israel. What?
Yichus, I think, is the Yiddish word.
Yichus?
Yeah, the concern with family trees.
Lineage.
Yeah.
Right?
There's a lot of that.
Right? A lot of connectedness to the priestly system. What else might you find in P?
Levites and Kohanim.
Good. You might find Levites and Kohanim. Which kingdom might you associate with P? Judah, right? So the southern kingdom.
So the places, you might see something related to the place, a place.
Good. So that's why he said Jerusalem. Okay? So if we're talking about J, which we can call either Adonai, we can call Yahweh, or we can call Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Okay? What might you associate with J? You might also see Jerusalem. What else?
Israel.
What do you mean Israel? The northern kingdom?
Southern.
Typically the southern kingdom, Jay. Right? Usually you'll see E in the north, but that's okay.
I forgot it.
What else might you associate with J? There's a big one. The name of God, right? You actually may not see the name of God in P. Right? Because instead of an emphasis being on God, you're going to have an emphasis on the priests, on the Kohanim, as the intermediaries, as the intercessors between the people of God. So you will see God, and in particular, you're going to see one of these God names.
Are you saying when we read the P, we're not going to see the name God?
No, you will see the name of God, but you may not always see the name of God.
So this very common formula, Vaydaber Adonai Elohim El Moshe Lemor, And God said, Adonai said to Moses, saying,
Yep.
is that characteristically P or J or what?
Depends on the context.
Depends on the context.
Why do you say it's characteristically P?
D,
Oh, D. Why do you say it's characteristically D?
Because that's the second telling, it's where most of the book of Deuteronomy is spoken by Moses.
Right. So it's going to depend a lot on the context.
yeah.
Okay. So we'll have to look at it as we get there. Anything else that you might associate with J?
Well, I mean, just Yahweh. Yud-Heh-Vud-Heh.
Good. Right. So the specific name of God here, as opposed to if we were talking about E, you're going to have L. Or Elohim, or the north. Okay? So we're going to look at a story. Go ahead.
But another big contrast is that J has God talking to people directly,
Good.
whereas E is typically dreams.
Yes. E tends to be more dreams. J is God interacting with people in a different way. We saw that last week in the stories that we read.
You just said E is the Lord's, that's like the 10 tribes other than Judah and Benjamin.
That is correct. Right? So what we would call the 10 lost tribes, or the 10 tribes that are assimilated, or the 10 tribes that are destroyed as a part of the northern kingdom by the Assyrians in 722 BCE.
I have one more. I think J has an emphasis on good and bad.
Okay?
Weren't there 4? J, P?
We're not at D yet.
Okay.
We'll get to D.
Well, did the 10 tribes also have Kohanim?
Okay, so part of what you're describing is this tension with redaction. Right? Because there's sometimes that you'll see a J that has an E reference or an E that has a J reference. Okay? Or you'll see a story that is exclusively J, and then there's like a one-liner that's slipped in. Right? That may be about the priest or about something else. Or you may literally see what we're going to see in just a second, which is this story which is ping-pong back and forth between J and P. And they can't make up their minds. So yes, you can see. And that's one of the reasons that Friedman argues that this original theory of documentary hypothesis that Gunkel came up with, that Julius Wellhausen came up with, and really kind of put into effect, may not be right. Right? It may not just be J, E, P, and D. It may be several other authors, or what we'll call, if you remember there was a packet I gave you at the very beginning that gave you all of the different forms of criticism. There were like a dozen of them. These are different ways that they brought together the text. So we'll start to see some of that in this story. So we're going to read the story. I need someone who will be a J, and I need someone who will be a P. Okay? Why don't you take J? And Alvin, why don't you take P? Okay, we're going to start in chapter 6, verse 5. And you're going to notice that chapter 6, verse 5 is J. And how do you know that it's J? Forget the color for a moment.
Yahweh.
Yahweh, right? That is your first clue, almost always, that it's J. Okay? So we're going to read, and in this case, we're only going to read the green sections. Okay, so is everyone in this book on page 42? Okay. As you read it, if you want, take notes, mark the things that you notice, and so Barbara, when you get to the end of verse 8, when you get to verse 8, Barbara, I want you to skip to chapter 7. Okay? So we're just going to read green, which is what we're going to call characteristically J. Okay? Whenever you're ready. Starting in verse 5.
And it was when humankind began to multiply on the face of the ground, and daughters were born to them. And
Where
the
are
son,
you?
No, she's starting with
Oh,
one.
start at 6:5. Verse 5. One paragraph down.
second floor.
That's okay. It's a good part too. We should read that too.
And Yahweh saw that human bad was multiplied in the earth, and every inclination of their heart's thoughts was only bad all the day. And Yahweh regretted that he had made humankind in the earth, and he was grieved to his heart. And Yahweh said, I'll wipe out the human whom I've created from the face of the earth, from human to animal to creeping thing, and to the bird of the skies, because I regret that I made them. But Noah found favor in Yahweh's eyes.
All right. So, before we continue, what do we know so far about our narrative based only on J?
God's not happy.
Say it again.
God's unhappy.
God's angry.
Made a mistake.
Okay.
And Noah's in good graces.
That was good.
And because God is angry with mankind, he's going to wipe out all the animals as well. So God is angry with everything that he's done, all life.
Back to the drawing board.
Yeah, it's interesting. Why does he want to wipe out everything if he's only angry and mad?
But he doesn't wipe out everything eventually.
Well, he does, but he wanted to wipe out everything except two of each.
Okay, hold on. Don't go there yet because we're going to look at it. The stories are going to tell two different narratives. Yeah,
It's a very personal God,
good.
anthropomorphic in a way.
Good.
And this guy has emotions.
He was
And a heart.
Yes. So one of the things that we'll often see about God is that sometimes the authors will choose to anthropomorphize God, which means give God human-like qualities, or traits, or attributes, or emotions, or body parts. Why would we do that?
to relate better.
Yeah, it helps us make God feel like something we can conceptualize. Because otherwise God feels amorphous. God feels bigger than us, we can't understand. This at least helps us create some kind of connection.
Yeah. It's also, we need to have Yahweh up there.
Good. Okay. Barbara, let's go to chapter 7. And as Barbara reads, we're going to only read the green parts.
And Yahweh said to Noah, "Come, you and all your household, into an ark, for I've seen you as virtuous in front of me in this generation. Of all the pure animals, take 7 pairs, man and his woman. And of the animals that are not pure, 2, man and his woman. Also of the birds of the skies, 7 pairs, male and female, to keep seed alive on the face of the earth. Because in 7 more days I'll rain on the earth, 40 days and 40 nights, and I'll wipe out all the substance that I've made from on the face of the earth." And Noah did according to all that Yahweh had commanded him. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him came to the ark from before the waters of the flood. And 7 days later the waters of the flood were on the earth, and there was rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And Yahweh closed it for him, and the flood was on the earth for 40 days. And the waters multiplied and raised the ark, and it was lifted from the earth. And the waters grew strong and multiplied very much on the earth, and the ark went on the face of the waters. And the waters had grown very, very strong on the earth, so they covered all the high mountains that are under all the skies. 15 cubits above, the waters grew stronger, and they covered the mountains. Everything that had the breathing spirit of life in its nostrils, everything that was on the ground died. And he wiped out all the substance that was on the face of the earth, from human to animal to creeping thing and to bird of the skies. And they were wiped out from the earth, and just Noah and those who were with him in the ark were left.
Okay, what's the story? What do we need to know?
Rain the water.
How long did it rain?
40 days.
Good. What else?
Seven of the clean animals.
How do we know which ones are the clean animals at this point?
The ones that took a bath.
Story.
It's a good question. How do we know that there are clean animals here? Kosher?
Well,
But we didn't have those
No.
laws.
We don't have kosher laws.
we talk about the Noahide laws.
Right, so there was a sense of Noahide laws at the time. It's not exactly clear what it means here.
Suitable for sacrifice.
Yeah, so probably clean means suitable for sacrifice here. If you were to go look at the text in the Hebrew, so I'm in the Chumash, chapter 7.
Although sacrifice doesn't come till Exodus.
Well, that's not 100% true. There's definitely sacrifices throughout the book of Genesis. Abraham offers sacrifices.
And Noah will at the end, but
Correct?
and
What's that?
Noah will also.
Yes. Noah does here at the end. So it says that what they're talking about is Mikol ha-behema ha-tehora, all of the pure animals. Any time that you use the words tameh and tahor, right? We're literally talking about impure and pure. These are very characteristic words that represent something around sacrifice. right? And so what we're probably talking about is the difference between a blemished animal, meaning it's not fit for sacrifice, and an unblemished animal that is fit for sacrifice. So that's most likely what the reference is here. It's a good question. We don't have sacrifices in the P tradition yet, but there were sacrifices in the ancient world.
But I also feel it doesn't matter that much if they make a mistake, because he's not saying take only the pure and the impure will die.
Right.
I mean, he's going to take
He's
some
going to take
all,
some of the others. He's going to
get
take
in line.
choosies of the others, okay?
It takes more.
But he doesn't say
He
how
does.
many men and women to take.
Right, but
Correct.
I'm just
We,
saying. they
who
will
goes
all-
into the ark according to this?
We don't know.
Noah and his family.
Noah, his sons, and his wife, and his sons' wives came into the ark.
And I really don't understand. If he said all humans are flawed and I made a big mistake, why would he save any?
Good question.
And if he thought Noah was righteous, why did he save anybody but Noah?
Good.
Why not just Noah? He could create a new woman.
Totally.
He created the whole thing in the first place.
What,
So
wait a
he
second, hold on. If
saves-
we're going to go there, then we should say, why don't we bring in the wife and get rid of Noah? And he can create a new man.
Exactly, but the point is, if he thought they were flawed, he saved people who were flawed and they were just going to multiply
Okay.
and create new flawed people.
All right, so let's look at this a little bit more deeply, because you're actually highlighting something really, really
He
important.
screwed up again.
Before we go to chapter 8, go back to the end, go back to chapter 6. What's the last sentence in the J tradition of chapter 6? But Noah found favor in Yahweh's eyes, in Adonai's eyes. And look at the beginning of chapter 7. And Adonai said to Noah, come you and all your household into an ark, for I have seen you as virtuous in front of me in the generation. Those two sentences work well together. They fit. They're a continuation one of the other. But if you look at verse 9 in chapter 6, there is this thing in bold or gray with blue. And if you look in your key, it's called R. What is R?
Redactor.
It's the redactor, right? Big fancy word for editor. And so the copy editor came in and decided to put something in called, these are the records of Noah. In Hebrew, it is, let's see, what verse is this? Verses 8. It is Eila Toldo Noach. Right? These are the generations. As if to say that there's been some separation, but it creates this thing in the text. And then if you look at the continuation of verse 9, what do we know about Noah? He's virtuous, he's unblemished, and he walked with God. Yes.
Is the Hebrew for unblemished the same tahar?
No, Tamim.
What does unblemished mean?
He's perfect, unflawed.
It's the same word as they use for the animals.
No, they use tahor and tameh.
And what did they use for Noah?
Tamim.
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 It's not the same root?
No. One's with a no. One's with a tet, one's with a top.
So isn't there a discussion about that he was righteous at his age? It doesn't necessarily mean that he was righteous.
Yes. And if you notice, what's the difference between 8 and 9b in terms of how we describe Noah? Yep, 9b. So the part that says Noah was a virtuous man. 9a is the redactor. 9a, yeah.
9A
Yep.
goes into more detail.
Yes.
But it also,
So no. 8 says, but Noah found favor in Adonai's
It
eyes.
doesn't tell you
But
what.
it doesn't tell you anything about it.
right.
No, we
Okay.
have the description, no.
Right. In verse 9b it says, Noah was a virtuous man, he was unblemished in his generations, he walked with God, he fathered 3 sons, and by comparison, the rest of the earth was corrupt before God. Now, why do we need...
So 9b is defining what we learned today.
Correct. Well, you can make 2 arguments. One argument is you can say, well, 9b is just an extension of 8. We're just getting a little bit more detail. But what he's arguing is, no, there is a different modus operandi for this particular author in describing Noah. What is the MO for the P tradition in describing Noah?
They have to build them up.
And?
You have Shem, who's going to be the father of future generations.
Yeah, and?
Ham, who isn't?
Well, yeah. Because he married cheese.
I mean, in 8, he could have been the best of a bad lot, but
Okay.
not very good.
Okay, and in 9?
9, he's great.
That's right. One of the big differences that they argue about with Noah was, how great was he? Was he just that they were all really bad and he just happened to be a little bit better than bad? Or was he really so different that he could be differentiated from everyone else that he was worth saving? P would have you believe the latter.
Yeah.
J would have you believe the former. And so it's not clear. Barbara's asking a great question. Why save Noah? And if we're saying he's the good person, why are we lumping his family together with him? How good was he? Actually, the commentaries say that he's not necessarily so good. Because if he was truly righteous, what would he have done?
He would have argued for the people.
He would have done what Abraham does.
Right.
Right? What does Abraham do when he negotiates with Sodom and Gomorrah? He goes back and forth. What if it's 50 people, 40 people, 30 people, 10 people? He haggles with them. But what else does Noah not do? Noah doesn't go out and try to change anybody. If he was really so righteous, wouldn't he go out and try to make other people righteous like him? So how righteous is he?
But chapter 6, verse 8 just says he found favor, but then
Yes.
when you go to 7 for J, it does say he's virtuous.
Yeah. All right. Now I'm going to throw you one for a loop. I want you to open up your red Humashim for a second.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Why does P use Elohim?
Why does P use Elohim? I'll get to it in a second.
Okay, it's confusing.
There's a tension, right?
Yes.
Why would P want to invoke Elohim amidst the story? What are they trying to suggest about the authorship? Who's being destroyed?
Bad Elohim people.
E is being destroyed.
Right.
P wants to raise up the priestly tradition. They want to raise up the Kohanim. They want to raise up the Leviim. They want to raise up sacrifices to their God. So what else is being destroyed here? An E tradition.
Yeah.
Okay. So look at page 41 in your red Humashim. Okay. What do you see on page 41? In the red Chumash. What is this? Yeah. What are we looking at?
We're looking at Torah text.
We are. What specifically?
Is that right?
No.
I mean, are we looking at the?
What story? We're looking at the beginning of what we'll call Torah portion Noah. This is when we get to Shabbat of Noah after Breshit. This is where we start on page 41. Where does the Torah portion start?
This is the one with Noah.
It starts in verse 9.
Right.
What tradition is that? P. But the real story of Noah actually starts at the end of what we're going to call the Torah portion of Breshit. Turn back to page 33 and 34. Barbara started reading at verse 6, or verse 5.
Oh.
Right, well, one of the considerations of splitting up parashas is they always want to end on as good a note as possible.
That is true.
And so, ending on Noah found favor in Adonai's eyes at the end of the prior parashah, Bereshit,
Yep.
would be ending on a good note.
Yes. So one way of suggesting that the way we break down Torah portions, there's actually a Jewish law about this. You cannot end an aliyah on a sour note. You got to end it on something at least neutral or uplifting. Same thing with the Torah portion, even if it's a cliffhanger. There's definitely a few exceptions here and there. So they decided to end the Torah portion at verse 8. V'Noach matzah chen b'einei Adonai. Noah found favor in the Lord. That's also the end of a J tradition. However, maybe there's another reason. What's the other reason? It's a different author. And so we're splitting up the Torah portion based on who wrote the text. We're ending one story, Breshit, with a J tradition, and we're starting a new Torah portion in a P tradition, and in particular, we're starting it in the middle of a paragraph. Stan, you look confused.
Yeah, because I thought that this editing of paragraphs or parashiyot happened much later
Much later than what?
than there's the people trying to the redactor doing the
Yeah.
Did. But presumably the people who are splitting it up understand that there's nuance and there's language difference between the texts. If I really wanted to introduce you to Noah, Why wouldn't I just start at the beginning and tell you Noah's story? You could easily make the theological argument, you know what, let me end the creation story on a good note, and I'll end with Noah as a foreshadowing of what's to come.
Right, well,
Don't we have the same thing with Abraham, ending that story?
We do.
With Terah and Abraham, and then the whole thing starts with Lech Lecha?
But why does it start with Lech Lecha? Why would they choose to start the story at Lech Lecha and not at the beginning of Abraham's life?
Can I underline your point?
Yeah.
And it's Isaiah, too.
What's Isaiah?
The thing that sits in between the Haftarah.
Yes.
And that's the statement, because that's incredibly Yahwist.
But when the Torah.
That's Isaiah 2,
Yes,
right?
that's true. What?
That's Isaiah 2?
Isaiah 2, yes.
And Isaiah 2 is like the most Yahwist of all of the
Yeah.
prophets.
So I understand what your question is, why we're starting Noah at 9. But it's a continuation of 8 from page 34.
That is correct. But what I'm asking you is, if we've just read this story in two different authors, right? We actually only read part of it so far, right? Why is it that conveniently our Torah portion starts and ends where the authorship divides? Does that make sense?
That caused a big question, because prior to you mentioning this, I didn't think that the people who split up the Torah into portions had any awareness of this documentary.
No, for sure not. The people who split up don't even know what a documentary hypothesis is.
Yes.
But what they do know is something else.
They may have had literary feel. They had
Right.
a literary feel, like this says, I want to end on a positive note, and maybe I want to build some excitement so that you want to come back next week and hear the rest of the story.
Right, so that's one possibility. But what we did say that they have is, remember, the authorship of this text happens before they're split up into parshiot. Right? So authors knew that there were different segments of the Torah portion that were being inserted at different times. So they're choosing where to break the story up based on some knowledge that this document is being put together over the course of history.
Oh, wait a minute. I thought that's what you just denied.
Why do
You
I
just denied that the rabbis who split up the Torah.
No, the rabbis of the Talmud would never ever say that this is called documentary hypothesis.
Well, sure.
The rabbis of the Talmud would say it's all written by God. But,
Yeah, well, through Moses.
but that's a spiritual angle. I'm talking about a historical angle. We're making the argument, we're making the claim in this class that this is a document that's been put together over the course of many generations and was redacted by different groups of people in order to make it be one coherent document. When does that happen? When are we saying that that happens historically? According to Friedman.
600 BCE.
600 BCE, around the time when the northern kingdom has already fallen and the southern kingdom is in power. This is 500, 600, 700, 800, 900 years before the rabbis come to the table. So they must know something about the authorship of the text, even if they're not going to call it J.E.P.D. They must know. And so it makes sense that there is something influencing the way that they are dividing up the text for us. They would never say that. They may not even know it, obviously. But there's too many coincidences here for them to not have some awareness that there's something different in the text.
Well, I would accept that there might be some kind of subtle influence, that the documents have some kind of influence in terms of just the literary feel of the text, and the literary feel of the text motivates the rabbis to write things in certain ways.
Absolutely.
Without rising to the level of consciousness.
It's a debate.
You know, like Friedman goes through this long history, he says, well, in the Middle Ages, Ibn Ezra has this intimation, and this other rabbi has this intimation, and so forth. It's pretty clear that through that period, people were groping towards this kind of a theory,
Sure.
but they hadn't arrived there.
No, of course they haven't arrived there, but clearly the group of people who are authoring the text were very intentional about what they were doing in redacting the text.
Sure. The redactor certainly had things in front of him.
Right.
And the redactor knew what he was doing.
Right, so that's part of the challenge, is you're talking about the difference between when the text was written and when it's understood how it was written.
There probably were different scrolls
Could be.
that were written in
At
the
different times.
northern kingdom and in the southern kingdom, and so the redactor might have had the texts
Right.
from which to redact.
Sure. But also remember something else. If we want to make the argument that this was all written by God, when does that argument come about?
Actually, throughout this whole development, nearly everybody wants to claim that the material is divine in some sense.
Right, but it's being redacted throughout the whole process too.
Yeah. So a person might, for instance, be the redactor, and he says, oh, I've got this document from this place, I've got this document from this place, and I know that in some sense both of them are divine, and I'm going to put them together.
Right. Look, part of all I'm trying to share with you is that there was probably more knowledge and awareness of the differences of the way the text was put together than anyone was willing to admit. And we can see that in reading the text this way. We actually don't need half of chapter 6, parts of chapter 7, and parts of chapter 8. We could just read it the way that Barbara just read it, and the story makes total sense. Yeah.
But you
Well,
don't
if the
know
rabbis,
anything.
Sorry, what did you say?
But you don't know anything about Noah then.
Correct. But we actually don't know much about most of the characters. We know very little about Adam and Eve. We know very little about Noah. We know very little about Lot. Even Isaac, we don't know so much about Isaac. So, I mean, the text clearly is intentional about which characters we do and don't get to know. We can ask why, but yeah, what were you saying?
So if these guys, the rabbis, spent all their lives and generations of their lives, and all they did was read this, they're going to come up with the differences. It's like an advanced English class. I mean,
Yes.
you gotta
yes.
figure it out.
Okay, Stan's shaking his head.
I mean, even if they don't separate it that way.
you read it with a belief.
Yes.
If you're reading
That's
it
the
with a
major difference.
belief
Correct.
that it was all written by one time by God, then you're not going to even trip over
No,
these
I'm not
differences.
saying they denied it was written by God. I'm just saying that they could pick up that God had subtle literary differences
Yes.
that he used.
Correct.
And they're going to pick
So the
those
difference
up.
between the historical and the spiritual, or the theological, as we would say, the historical would say, no, these are clearly different documents that have been strung together into one broader narrative. And the spiritual, the theological would say, God is unbelievably talented in writing a document like this that has so much nuance and room for interpretation, and wow, what did God mean when God wrote it this way as opposed to wrote it that way, or why do we use God's name? I mean, it all means something.
What
You
was
could
the
have a
disclosure
split
verse?
personality.
I mean, it's the 5 books of Moses.
We will get to the question of what Moses' role was in it. It's
I
going to
mean-
come later, because there's a big question: who wrote this? Did Moses write it? Did Joshua write it? I mean, there's a lot of inconsistencies that Friedman talks about. How is it that Moses could be authoring his own death? And what comes after his death? Was there a shift in power? Moses clearly isn't around during the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, so who's writing that narrative?
Well, maybe the theory would be that he was told in advance by God, this is what's going to happen.
Right, so that's why he was up there for 40 days, because it took a long time to write it all out. To chisel it,
Well,
right,
you're
exactly.
going to destroy him.
Right, sure.
I mean, it seems to me that all this stuff happened over many hundreds
It did.
of thousands of
It
years.
did.
And it wasn't being written as it happened. Somebody was remembering it. So maybe it was a sign. You guys remember this stuff, and and then they came together and they put it all
Great.
together.
So let's read it through this lens. If we go with Audrey's point, then chapter 6 makes perfect sense. Right? Someone read part of the story. We're going to say J is fairly early. Right? Someone read part of the story and they're like, you know what? I think it's missing some details. Let's fill it in a little bit. And so in comes P and says, let me give you a little bit of background about Noah. Because it doesn't make sense to just say he found favor. What does that mean? Oh, he walked with God. That's impressive, right? That means something. It wasn't just him, it was his wife and they were different from other people, right? We can fill it in a little bit as a way of being able to give more robustness to the story.
Has anybody studied other examples of oral storytelling through
yeah.
the ages?
Yeah.
Actually,
and laid it on top of this?
Yeah.
The
Sure.
Ways stories are told in different cultures.
Totally.
yeah, the whole thing of this kind of criticism began with the study of Greeks and had theories about evolution of Homer, the book of Homer, Iliad, the Odyssey. And then those same scholars took those skills, that skill set, and applied it to the Bible.
Right.
And
So the purpose of reading the story of Marduk and Tiamat is it's one example of an ancient Mesopotamian narrative, ancient Near Eastern narrative that talks about creation. And there's a dozen creation narratives. If you look at all of them side by side, you'll start to see parallels. I wrote a paper in college all about the book of Job. It turns out that the book of Job is not unique to Judaism. Every single ancient civilization wanted to answer the question of theodicy. Why do bad things happen? So every single ancient theology has a Job narrative. And you can literally compare elements of every single story that are the same and common through everyone.
No, I kind of meant the structure. So you got a bunch of Native Americans sitting around the fire during their holiday. And what's the method they use to tell stories? Did somebody start a story about this bison hunt and then another guy stopped them and said, hold it. You forgot the detail about, John over here who went and chased the deer that, I mean,
I don't know.
is that
That's
the way they
fascinating.
did?
I haven't thought about that.
There, I have read that, for instance, the Navajo to this day preserve oral traditions through memorization, which is passed along in ceremonies.
Right.
Yeah, that's typically the way it is. I'm just talking about the process of the ceremony.
Right.
Introducing different narratives within the
I
ceremony.
don't know the answer to that. I mean, maybe, I'm not sure.
It could be in a very structured way.
Yeah.
It was his role to then come in and talk about the deer being
Right.
chased.
Right.
So Friedman tries to get at this in his book about talking about, well, maybe only the Levites were down in Egypt and then they came back and they met more Semitic tribes that were already in Canaan, and the Levites brought Adonai and the other Semites had El.
Yeah.
And they said, well, they're really not so much different from one another, so they combined them.
Yes.
But when the northern tribes were destroyed and people came down from the northern kingdom, they needed to they couldn't have stories that just promoted the southern kingdom. If they weren't going to incorporate the people, they had to incorporate stories from the north
That's right.
into their tradition.
That's right.
And that's why we have this
Right.
combination of things.
Correct. Yeah.
Also, just to give you a sense of how old this is probably 10,000 to 6,000 BCE. So at the end of the Ice Age,
1,000. Oh. This story? 10,000?
these floods occurred
floods.
somewhere between 10
sorry.
and 6,000 BC. And the reason was because during the Great Ice Age, there was an enormous amount of water that was sequestered in the glaciers. And they melted around 10,000 to 6,000 years ago, and the sea level rose around 360 feet. So there were gigantic swaths of the Middle East that were completely inundated as the rising seas. So there are many different cultures that have flood traditions around those periods.
Thought to have originated when the flooding of the Black Sea Basin,
Right.
the opening of the Bosphorus.
Right.
All right, let's go. I want to read chapter 6 and 7 from the P tradition, and I want to compare them. Who is it? Was it Alvin?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to go back to chapter 6, starting in verse 9b, and we're going to just read the blue section now.
Noah was a virtuous man. He was
Page
unblemished
42.
in his generations. Noah walked with God. And Noah fathered 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And the earth was corrupted before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and here it was corrupted, because all flesh had corrupted its way on the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, because the earth is filled with violence because of them. And here I am destroying them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms with the ark, and pitch it outside and inside with pitch. And this is how you shall make it: 300 cubits the length of the ark, 50 cubits its width, and 30 cubits its height. You shall make a window for the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from the top, and you shall make the ark's entrance in its side. You shall make lower, second, and third stories for it. And I am bringing the flood water on the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life from under the skies. Everything that is in the earth will expire, and I shall establish my covenant with you. And you'll come to the ark, you and your sons and your wife, and your sons' wives with you, and all of the living of all flesh you shall bring 2 of each to the ark to keep alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds by their kind, and of the domestic animals by their kind. Of all the creeping things of the ground by their kind, 2 of each will come to you to keep alive. And you take some of every food that will be eaten and gather it to you, and it will be for you and for them for food. And Noah did it, according to everything that God commanded, and he did so.
All right. In the first part of this P narrative, what do we have that we didn't have before?
Details.
Details. What kind of details?
Cubits of this.
So details
Of the ark.
Sort of logistics.
of the ark. What else?
Names of the sons.
Say it again.
Names of the sons.
Names of the sons.
You have a covenant.
Yeah.
Good. That makes sense, covenant.
How to make the ark waterproof.
Good. Right, we're going to make the ark
A
waterproof.
little bit of engineering history.
And here it's also saying all flesh, not just humankind, has corrupted the earth.
Okay, all flesh. What else?
And two animals each.
2 animals by twosies.
And God, Noah got his directions from God.
Yes. What kind of God?
They're commanded.
What kind of God?
That would be unmoving.
Look
No,
carefully.
not Yahweh.
Oh,
It's not Yahweh.
Yahweh.
It's not Yahweh.
It says God.
It just says God. If you were to look in the Hebrew, in verse 9,
That'd
it
be
says,
Elohim.
Eile toldo Noach ish sadik, tamim hayavador tav, et ha-Elohim hitalech Noach. Right? P oftentimes will not use Yahweh. Okay? Because it's not J.
yeah.
And remember, the priests are in conflict with Elohim. If we're going to destroy everything on the earth, what else are we going to destroy?
Elohim.
Elohim.
So what are you using all here?
Good question. Part of what is being created here or recreated again is a refocusing of people's attention back to God. Remember, why is the world being destroyed?
Corruption.
It is corrupt. But do we know why it was corrupt?
Probably didn't follow God's rules.
It says, the earth was filled with lawlessness, one of my favorite Hebrew words, Hamas. When God saw how corrupt it was, for all flesh had corrupted its ways, God said to Noah, I've decided to put an end to all the flesh. I'm going to destroy them. So make an ark. What'd they do? No. What did they do that was so bad? We don't know. Yeah.
Earlier on,
Okay.
there was a text that said that the sons of God were essentially coveting the women.
Yep.
So there's an implication of sexual immorality.
Yep.
Well, that's Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right? If you go back to the beginning of chapter 6,
No. It's always.
go back to the beginning of chapter 6. We actually didn't read this part. I made Barbara start at verse 5. Barbara, please read verses 1 through 4.
And it was when humankind began to multiply on the face of the ground, and daughters were born to them. And the sons of God saw the daughters of humankind, that they were attractive, and they took women from all they chose.
Okay. What is the name of sons of God in Hebrew? B'nai Elohim. What does that mean, sons of God? Please don't say Jesus.
The angels, the heavenly host.
Heavenly hosts, the angels, we're not really sure, but look at the very next word, phrase. And?
Daughters of humankind.
No, they took the women from all that they chose, and? Verse 3. And Yahweh said, we have in a J tradition a tension between B'nai Elohim, the sons of Elohim, and Yahweh, and Adonai. In one J tradition. All right, and what does Adonai say? Lo yadon ruchi ba'adam le'olam. Right, he says, my breath shall not abide in man forever, since he too is flesh. Let the days of him be allowed to be 120 years. Very common for J. J sets a term limit on how old we're going to be. That's why we say until 120. All right, and then he says, it was then and later too that the Nephilim appeared on earth.
The giants.
Who were the Nephilim?
The giants.
They're the giants. They play at AT&T Park. Okay? And it says, when the divine beings cohabited with the daughters of men who bore them offspring, they were heroes of old, men of renown. So who do they sleep with? They sleep with the daughters of the divine beings, of the B'nai Elohim. There's something going on here that feels a little bit...
Incestuous.
Sure. I was going to say idolatrous. Right? Meaning they're hanging out with people who are the sons of Elohim, not with Adonai. And then it says...
like it Greek stuff.
It does a little bit. And then verse 5 says, the Lord saw how great man's wickedness was on earth, and how every plan devised by his mind was nothing but evil all the time. What is it that God sees that's so bad? It could very well be.
They're not like praying to him.
They're not praying to God. So it could be that one of the reasons why Noah is favored is because, look at verse 8, V'Noach matzah chen be'enei Adonai. Noah is the exception amongst the people living there. He finds favor with Yahweh, with Adonai, not with Elohim.
So Elohim and Adonai are two different beings.
They're two different beings. right? Remember, El, what does El mean?
God.
It means God generic. I'm going to call it lowercase God. But who is El in particular? Who does El represent?
Oh.
Right, the God of the Canaanites.
Yeah.
As opposed to Yud He Vav He, the Tetragrammaton, is the God of J, of Israel, of what will become Israel, or of anything other than El. Part of what we might be reading here in this story is that the reason for the destruction of the world is because people are worshiping El and not Adonai. We actually don't know why they were being destroyed. We can only infer it based on the context. The Midrashim, Fred, you were about to say one of the Midrashim. What does the Midrash say about why they were destroyed?
Well, I've forgotten, but I'm pretty sure Secular Immorality is one.
Yep. Yep, it says actually in a note here, according to the Jerusalem Talmud, the Jerusalem understands the word lawlessness, Hamas, to mean that people cheated each other for such small sums that the courts could not prosecute them. It caused people to lose faith in the power of government, to provide them with a fair and livable world, and society began to slip into anarchy.
So does this mean that the conflict is between God and idols?
You can make the argument.
But if that was the conflict and he wiped out all humankind, why did we get idols back again?
Ah, great. So now you're jumping to the end of the story, which is ultimate. Good.
Three sons, my three sons, only one of them is our progenitor.
That's
the others
correct.
Are the progenitors of all,
Of
the
all
other
of our
peoples
enemies.
all in the world.
But one of the things that happens at the very end of the story of Noah is God makes a brit, according to the P tradition. And what does the brit say?
He won't destroy the world.
I won't do it again.
By flood.
Okay. Yes, hypothetically by flood is all it means. But what we can make the argument to be is that God is no longer to destroy the world because it is no longer in God's control to be able to prevent people from worshiping the way that they're going to worship.
I'm just not sure where you got worship out of cohabiting.
Oh no, I didn't get that cohabited.
Because it just sounds to me like, and maybe it's because I don't read the Hebrew, when the divine beings cohabited with the daughters of men who bore them offspring. It was like you were mixing.
Where did you get daughters of men?
Page 34.
Right. So the part that's the key phrase is the phrase right before that. B'nai ha-Elohim. The sons of God are cohabiting with Benot ha'Adam, with the daughters of humanity. Why does the Torah choose to use the word children of Elohim?
Because that's the Eve tradition.
Okay.
It's the El.
It's the El, right? It's a very intentional choice of language here.
But later we have Adonai Elohim.
Yeah, but that's a very different description because it's linked to Yud He Vav He.
Yeah.
But here we don't.
No.
In the second creation story, go ahead, Robert.
Would you go over that again?
I'll go over it again. Okay. Let's go back to the beginning of the Torah for a second. We looked at Genesis 1 and we looked at Genesis 2. Who is the God of Genesis 1? Reshit bara Elohim. Who is the God of Genesis 2? Adonai, or Adonai Elohim. Okay? So we have two different names of gods. And we're saying that those two different names of God represent two different traditions, what we're going to call J and what we're going to call E. In the story that we read today, in the beginning of chapter 6, we're saying that this story was authored by J. But within the J narrative, there are these people that we're going to call sons of God. Okay, literally, B'nai Elohim.
I think you need to look at the entire Tanakh. You find this phrase, or like, right? Sons of Elim.
But Elim is different than
Is that
Elohim.
Sure, yeah,
But it still comes from the word El.
right. So anyway, I think you need to look at the entire corpus of the literature, because this phrase B'nai Elohim, like it says in the footnote here, is actually a term of art. It's not that we can literally say, oh, this is B'nai means sons of, and Elohim means God, that's God in the capital G. It's that B'nai Elohim is this phrase that was routinely used, and we can't fully reconstruct the cultural context.
So look at the note that Fred's pointing out. On the bottom of page 42, it says, This is the only occurrence of the word God in the narration of all J in the Masoretic text. It is not part of the issue of the name of it is not part of the issue of the name of God distinction, because it is not independent, but is rather part of a fixed phrase, B'nai Elohim, which can either mean sons of God or sons of gods, meaning divine beings of some sort. So it is a unique phrase, but the challenge here is that we've introduced divine beings. And so, when you remember, part of the tension of the authors is that they're trying to get one God to win out. Right? Who is the God that we want to win out? Yahweh, Adonai. Well, we're going to call monotheism. But part of what he's also suggesting is that there may have been this thing called monolatry, meaning that there are multiple gods where one God is more powerful than it. If you wanted more evidence of it, do you remember the story of the creation of humanity where it says, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and it's in the plural? Yeah. Who are the plural people? Huh? The heavenly hosts, maybe. But we don't actually know. But why is it that it talks about there being a plural? All right, I feel like I lost a whole bunch.
Is it Elohim then?
Huh?
Is it Elohim?
If I remember correctly, it is.
Because then it would be the gods.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering if you could just repeat what you said about what the violation was that caused God to destroy the earth.
Sure. I don't know, is the short answer. I don't know what the violation is. I was making an argument that perhaps because in a J tradition, where we're talking about Adonai, that there's a reference to this weird phrase, B'nai Elohim, that these sons of God, or sons of gods, are engaging with, cohabiting with the women, or the daughters of man. And so what I'm making the argument is that because it uses a phrase that incorporates the word Elohim into it, it must mean that there is a tension going on between Adonai and anyone associated with Elohim. So the reason why the world was viewed as corrupt is because people were no longer worshiping Adonai.
Or could it mean that the sons of God were because God created man, and the daughters of mankind because woman came from man? So that you've got the man who came from God and the woman, so that's just men and women. If you define it by the men.
So why not just say men and women?
I don't know.
Why throw in the word Elohim?
I don't know, but,
I think you're right. If we took out the word Elohim and it wasn't there, you'd probably be spot on.
Maybe it's just the way they were described, that men came from God and women came from men.
But
And man came from Venus and
Yeah.
Your theory is that the women were cohabitating with these people who worship the generic or other gods.
or somehow involve themselves of the doings and the business of these people that are connected to Elohim.
Were the B'nai Elohim God-like creatures themselves? Because it's talking about being the sons of God?
Yeah, that's the part that we don't know.
They
And
sort of sound like hybrids.
by the way,
Half human,
it's not
half
just the B'nai Elohim, it's the Nephilim,
And the giants.
right? Nephilim we usually translate as giants,
Right.
right? And where's the other place in the Torah where we get the giants?
When the scouts go in.
Good. When the scouts go out, they come back and they say, we looked like grasshoppers to them. They were giants, and so must we have actually
Those
here,
are
right?
Under the kingdom, right?
They use the word Nephilim there too.
Yeah, they do.
But Nephilim literally means the fallen ones. Okay, there's a note actually in here that says, the offspring of divine beings. These Nephilim, the etymology of the word is unknown, generated other Nephilim in the course of their married lives. Some suggest that the term means fallen ones, a reference to the later myth of the fallen angels. What I'm trying to suggest is that so we actually don't know why the world was destroyed according to the text. It just says that things were bad. But if you read the previous part of this text, which is in J, and if it's in J, who's the God that we want to focus on? Yahweh, Adonai. That all of a sudden it's curious that they're talking about Nephilim and sons of El, or Elohim. In which case you're creating a tension in the text of who is the God that reigns supreme. What is the best way for a God to reign supreme? To demonstrate that God's power. What better way to show the world your power than to say, I'm going to destroy the entire world and get rid of all of the Elohims?
Big butt.
Yeah, the
Right,
big,
the big
button.
button. Thank you. That's where you got it from.
It
It all goes back to that.
Works.
Okay?
Bigger.
Now,
My
Yeah.
impression is that there's a chaotic backstory of what did the ancient Israelites believe about these non-Yahweh gods.
yes, that's a great question.
And it's not, we don't have a lot of documentation
We don't,
here,
no.
right? But for instance, we do have a passage where one guy is talking to another group of people and says, yeah, Hamosh gave you your land and Adonai gave us our land. So at least in that context, that person seems to be crediting Hamosh as actually being somebody who has the ability to give land to somebody.
By the way, going forward, almost all of the Torah is this perpetual ongoing tension between our God and the other gods.
Yeah, right.
If you will, this is the beginning story of the tension that exists between gods. That's what creation is all about. It's about determining the authority of one God over another. And the Jewish tradition is going to say, the Israelite tradition is going to say, Adonai reigns supreme. And it really all starts with the flood narrative. God says, I got to destroy the world because no one believes in me. And so the only way to demonstrate it is to destroy everything, living, why animals too?
Part of God's creation.
Not only that, animals were used to worship. Animals were used as a source of worship, and they were worshipped themselves.
But wasn't Abraham the first one to believe in God?
Okay, so now we're getting into some other deep stuff. By the way, who is the first character that comes on the scene after the Noah story? Who's 10 generations later? Abraham. Right? You can make the argument that the first 11 chapters of the Torah are really only about one thing. It's about getting Adonai onto the scene and then picking the primary person who will believe in Adonai, Abraham. And so what I'm trying to suggest to all of us in reading the story the way that we did is that it's really about not just the flood, not just destruction, it's a power struggle between gods.
And this is what the prophets are, all the prophets rail against
Totally.
are backsliding to El.
That's right.
Baal.
That's right. So much of our corruption that exists in Jewish tradition and Israelite tradition centers around our unwillingness or our abandoning of God. Why was the first temple destroyed? According to the Talmud.
Bad things that happened.
Because of idolatry and inappropriate sexual behavior and murder. But idolatry was the primary one. Well, if you think about it, they're actually all related. Right? Certain inappropriate sexual acts is a form of idolatry, and murder is also said to be a form of idolatry because people would often kill people for the sake of their gods. By the way, we still have that today.
Yes.
Okay?
How?
So that's what. Why was the second temple destroyed?
Blind hatred.
Senseless hatred, sinat chinam. But what does that really mean? Who were we hating? Each other. What does it mean to hate another person? You don't see them in the image of God, and you're not following God's tradition that tells you how to relate to and be in relationship with other human people. Right? So it's all interrelated. So I would make the argument that so much of the tension that we see in this flood narrative is about God trying to assert God's power. I want to just park for a second. We could have a whole theological conversation about, do we believe in that God? It's a worthwhile conversation to say, do I believe in a God who is vindictive, who says, I want to destroy the world in order to make sure that everyone knows I'm the best?
We have the same problem with the Exodus story.
Totally. It's all over the Torah and the prophets.
Yeah, it's like a competitive, jealous God.
Totally. Well, we actually know that. It says in the Torah that God is El Kana, a jealous, zealous God. All right, so have I totally, thoroughly confused you? Who here is not at all understanding what it is I'm talking about, besides me? Okay. It's not easy, and we're gonna sit with it a while. What we're gonna do next time is we're gonna look at the binding of Isaac. All right? Everyone knows the binding of Isaac? All right. If you will, I want you to read chapter 22 of of Genesis. But I want you to read it in two ways. The first way I want you to do is I want you to read it all the way through. And then I want you to read it in the redacted way. The redacted way is in your book. It has it with the different colors. And I want you to notice what is the difference between the two stories. It's on page 64, chapter 22. and read the note, and if you have a red chumash, read it in the red chumash. Read it a few different times and try to think about what the difference is. What's going on? Where do you notice different languages of God? Where is there God Adonai? Where is the God Elohim? Does God Adonai behave differently than God Elohim? Where does Isaac show up? Where does Isaac not show up? Who is the center of the story? Who's not the center of the story? Okay? Questions? Okay, are you guys going to keep coming back, or did I?
Thank you.